right, I have.
This is Pastor David from the Edmonton Central Seventh-day Adventist Church.
And to my left, we have Dr. Paulien. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm presently a professor at Loma Linda University, and the exciting challenge there is that we have students of every imaginable faith background in our classes. So it's very different than training Seventh-day Adventist ministers. You need to meet them where they are, and some of these same issues my son talks about, I wrestle with in the classes.
Awesome, awesome. Well, at Berman University, we used a few of your textbooks, a few of your books as textbooks. So I feel like you were kind of my pseudo professor a little bit. Yeah, it's really cool. And I really enjoyed your sermon this evening. And we just want to thank you for your ministry here with us today.
Yeah, so let's start by just going into some takeaways from the message. I really resonated with your thought about the character of God as being a primary issue for us in this day and age. We see it all around in the casual conversations that I have. It's people are wondering, like, I tell them I'm studying, the history of the world history and how it relates to God. They're like, well, how does that help you as a Christian, right? Don't you just see a bunch of terrible things? Like, how does that help you get to God, right? So I thought, seeing all of world history as that sort of argument was really helpful. Yeah. What about you, Jordan?
My main takeaway was that God is beautiful. And the picture that we have of God is oftentimes not as beautiful as he really is. And that if we are serving a God who isn't beautiful, we need to meet the God who is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Doctor, or can we call you John? I think we
Sure.
talked about that before. Can you just give us in a nutshell, like, what's one sentence or one paragraph? What would you like us to take away from your message tonight?
Well, the message in general, the big takeaway is exactly what you said, the picture of God and what that invites us to be and to do as followers of that God. But tonight, just thinking of this in the light of the idea, Adventism for the 21st century, I think this is the first time I really connected this with what the work my son is doing. With some of these folk from all kinds of backgrounds. Like one or two of his friends are former Adventists, but many of them are other Christian churches, and that so many of them have just become atheists and stuff. It really struck me that this message here is speaking directly to these two main issues that my son seems to run across almost on a daily basis. So if he's watching tonight, Joel, we're going to talk about this when I get back.
Awesome.
But anyway, yes, I think this is exciting, and he's wanting me to at some point just go online with him and meet some of these people, and we'll see what God can do with that.
Well, hopefully this will be good practice for you.
Yeah.
And we want to invite anybody, especially Joel if you're watching, but anybody to throw your questions in the comments, even your hard questions. We'd like some material to interact with there, and we'd like you to scratch where you're itching, so to speak. So just drop a comment in the chat if you want to ask a question or make a comment. We'll try to bring that out in our discussion. So, Pastor Jordan, you had a really great question, and I would like you to just put it to our speaker now, and I think that'll give us enough to go on for the next 10 minutes here at least.
I accept that the picture I have of God is not always a beautiful one, and it's not always a kind one, and that it needs to change. However, coming to the awareness that I have a skewed picture of God didn't really give me the steps on how do I now change the picture from a sadistic God to a loving God. What are the steps, even though I'm aware that my picture needs to change, what are the steps that I can take as a Christian and follower of Christ to change my view from one to the other?
Well, if Jesus is the clearest picture of what God is like, then starting with the picture of Jesus that you have in the four Gospels, I think would be critical to that. But at the same time, we don't want to forget, tonight we were talking about Revelation, not the Gospels, And it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now there's a whole nother side to this, because so many people have read the book of Revelation and come out with a very disturbing picture of God. Right. In fact, the number one issue in the last 20 years or so in Revelation scholarship, and I've been blessed to be representing the Seventh-day Adventist faith among secular scholars around the world, and we tend to meet once a year in conferences and wrestle over these things. But the number one issue is the violence in the book of Revelation, and the perception that God is the author of that violence, and therefore God is not as ethical maybe as we are. So that's a big one that people come across. So to reread Revelation in the light of Jesus' gospel message, if this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, then it should be revealing a God who is different than that, picture of the stern, sadistic God, who smokes people in flames. There are texts in Revelation that sound exactly like that. So you have to ask the question, have we read it correctly? Has Revelation steered the Adventist church at times to a more dark picture of God than the Gospels would lead us to? And if so, can we read again and maybe see some overtones that we had missed before?
So what I'm hearing as the answer to my question is, in order to change my picture of God from a sadistic and stern one to a merciful and fair one, then I can read the Gospels and see Jesus displayed, right? Like John says, he's shown us his glory. We have seen his glory, the glory of the only Son of the Father, and see Jesus displayed in that will give me a clear picture of God, and then read Revelation in the light of the clearest picture of God we have.
Yeah, I wouldn't start with Revelation simply because that aspect can be so easily misunderstood. Study Revelation, of course, as part of the whole Bible, but I wouldn't go to Revelation to cure a dark picture of God, because there's too much there that might be misunderstood. I would take the advice of Ellen White, who said it would be well that we would spend a thoughtful hour each day contemplating the life of Christ, especially the closing scenes, from the Lord's Supper, the betrayal of Judas, you've seen me, you've seen the Father, the foot washing, the trial, all the rest of that, all the way through how he died, etc. This is the clearest revelation of God ever. And as we contemplate that, and I think books like Desire of Ages can be very helpful, because Ellen White does a very deeply psychological reading. A friend of mine said one day, and I thought it was outrageous when I first heard it, and I thought, well, wait a minute, he's onto something. He says in Desire of Ages, Ellen White is giving us a psychological picture of Jesus. And what he's saying is, if you read carefully, you see she's probing Jesus' emotions. It goes beyond the biblical text to probe his emotions, what he was thinking, what he was feeling when people came to him, what was going on in his mind as he was healing people. I mean, that is gold when you think about it, for getting a deeper understanding of what God must be like. The God that portrayed in Jesus is actually deeply emotional. And we sometimes think our emotions are something to set aside, and let's just have these, intellectual sort of approach to the faith. But God is the God who made us in his image. And if we're emotional beings, then God must be too. And Ellen White brings that out so powerfully in Desire of Ages. It's something I hadn't really noticed. But a friend of mine who read the book recently came and said, this is a psychological picture of Jesus. She's constantly probing his mind. And that, I just missed that before.
That's really cool.
So one of the, maybe I'm the terrible reader, okay? But I find second and third readings are sometimes important to really figure out what's going on.
No, great books are meant to be read more than once.
Yeah.
Right? And the Bible's written as a book that's meant to be read more than once. You're not going to pick everything up the first time through. I think it's important to remind people of that. We have a comment from Laurie Short who says, powerful, relevant message from a man who presents the revelation of Christ in a clear way. So there's an affirmation for your ministry, and we do appreciate that. I want to put another question along the same lines to you, which is, what do you do with an agnostic, who comes to you and says, okay, well, I admit maybe or an atheist even. Sure, you reject the God that I reject, but how do I know which religion's got the right God, right? Like, how do I know that the Bible's really got it nailed down, or that any of the traditions of the world do, right? How can I really, have any confidence there?
I think I'd start with an affirmation. And the affirmation is that all of us in some part of our life should be a little agnostic, in the sense that all of us have an inner scholar who needs to challenge our own thinking. You remember what I said? First time I read the Bible, I didn't see that. Okay? So we take what we have, we commit to what we know, but at the same time we're open that God, the Holy Spirit, others maybe can help us to see what we have missed before. So a little bit of agnosticism can be a good thing as part of a walk with God. So I would affirm that side. Asking those kind of questions is an important piece of it. But what they may be missing, I wouldn't necessarily say it that way, but what they may be missing is commitment. None of us can prove without a doubt that God exists. None of us can prove a lot of things that we believe.
Sure.
But our experience with God, our experience with reading, etc., gradually brings us to a place where we say, I think I know enough to commit. Yeah. And in the committing, the commitment grows. If you don't commit, the agnosticism takes over. But when you commit to the truth that you know, that which you're confident in, that which you trust, commit to that and you'll get more. And so I would encourage people, taste and see. Yes. Give it a try. Yes. If you've run into some branch of Christianity that was even slightly attractive to you, give it a shot. Put your trust in that picture of God, and God will grow it. When I didn't have the best picture of God, He still honored it.
That's right.
He still was with me. He still helped me learn more and grow more. So you commit to what you know, and then God will grow that over time in something I call stages of faith. God will grow you over time.
I fully agree with that. And I've never been able to argue anybody into accepting the Bible. The only way that people have accepted the Bible in my ministry is by exposing themselves to it repeatedly, and then asking God to guide them in that experience.
I have an anecdote.
Go for it.
When I was in undergrad, I met one of my closest friends in ministry in my third year. And that year we became very close, but I had a roommate. And she had mentioned something along the lines of, we're best friends on campus. And I should have just been like, yeah, you're one of my best friends on campus. But I was like, yes, and I also have a roommate, and I really love her too. Which I didn't need to say, but I said it. I could have just
If she's watching, you can hold her accountable for
I
that.
could have just affirmed the relationship, but that's what I said. And she was like, what? You don't have a roommate? And I was like, yes, I do have a roommate. And we got into this whole argument about whether or not I have a roommate, which is odd because she had been in my room before and not seen my roommate, because we had bunk beds and her desk was behind the bunk bed. So then you would have to come and turn and look to see that she's there. But she's always there, right? She's always there. And I realized that it was utterly ridiculous for me to be engaging in an argument with my friend over whether or not I have a roommate. Right? And I was trying to bring up logical arguments to prove that I had a roommate, and this was nonsensical. So what I did was I just brought her to my room and introduced them. And then she was like, oh, you do have a roommate. this person does exist. Why have I never seen her before? Because she's quiet and she doesn't like to talk. And you low-key came into the room and didn't say anything to anybody else, so you're kind of the wrong one in this situation. But it was just a reminder for me that if ever I get into an argument over the existence of my friend, that's nonsensical. What I need to do is introduce people to my friends. And God is our best friend. And I think that we would do well to spend more time introducing people to him.
Yeah, giving people a new experience prepares the way for them to receive a new answer. And I think we try to do it the other way around far too often. Is there any last word you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up tonight?
Well, maybe to tell a brief story, because
Sure.
I had an aunt who was an atheist, or at least proclaimed herself as such. Perhaps understandable, because at the age of 16, she lived in Berlin in 1945. And that meant that she had been severely treated by enemy soldiers 5 days round the clock, along with several of her relatives. She never told that story. I learned it from a cousin, after she died. And she hated God and she hated men. And there was one night there when she was sort of going at it and so forth, and I said, well, the picture of Jesus that you have may not exactly be the actual one. And I began telling about the Gospel of John. And I was just saying, what a beautiful picture that we see in the Gospel of John, and how the Gospel of John was almost written, the Gospel of John persuades simply by reading it. The book is designed to persuade.
Yeah.
And it has some interesting techniques that literary critics have drawn out from the book. Okay, so I just said, if a person would just read the Gospel of John, it'll make a difference. And I went to bed. I was staying there at her place while traveling one time, and it was one of those mobile homes kind of a thing, sort of double wide,
Sure.
and it had forced air ventilation. And as I was going to the bed, I heard her talking with her partner through the vent. Okay?
Yeah.
And the partner said, "What's that?" And she said, "Nothing." "No, what's that in your hand?" "Nothing." "That's a Bible, isn't it?" "So, what are you doing with the Bible? You hate these things." "None of your business." "No, come on, this is not like you." "Well," she says, "that stuff he was saying about Gospel of John, I want to see what that's all about."
Amen.
Now, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been eavesdropping unintentionally. But to get that experience, to actually taste the Word, that can soften almost any heart. And what she went through, I have to say, a merciful God. There were days when I felt like God would be more positive about her than about me. Her authenticity, it was awful to listen to sometimes, but it was real, it was heartfelt. She had suffered so much, and she just didn't understand why a God would allow all that to happen in her life. But to taste the kind of God we've been talking about tonight, that's the only healing I know.
Beautiful. Well, I think we have to leave it there, folks. There's a lot more we could talk. I had wanted to get into the text of Revelation a little bit, but I think these questions.
There's going to be a few more nights on that, so we might get back to it.
And these questions, I think, are foremost in the minds of many people who are listening to a presentation on the book of Revelation. So it's really important to discuss these matters. So thank you for doing that with us. Pastor Jordan, unfortunately, you will not be with us tomorrow night, but we will find a
suitable
I hate to say replacement, but somebody to fill the seat.
Yes.
And I'm sure they'll be suitable, as you said, and we'll look forward to seeing you here again later in the week. And we'll be back I promised, actually, the last time I promised to be back another night, we were not here because I didn't realize there was no live stream that night. But we will be back tomorrow night. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.